Zuby.
Hey, Pani, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Blessed and highly favored as always.
Yes, you are. Very nice to meet you. Thank you so much. I know you're a very popular guy. You've been on like every popular podcast and like every news media. So yeah, thank you so much for doing this.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
So for people that are listening or watching who might not be familiar with Zuby, uh, Zuby's a rapper. He's also an author, a fitness expert. You're also a coach, a podcaster. It's just like you're so multifaceted. You went to Oxford University. There was also a time you were a consultant,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, that's
But
right.
my favorite thing that you've done is when you received worldwide attention for deadlifting more than any Brit woman has ever, while identifying as a woman.
Yeah,
I
weird
loved it
claim
when
to
you did
fame.
that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Of all the things I've done in the world and all the content I've put out there, I was not expecting a 9-second video of me identifying as woman and deadlifting to be the thing that would give me international acclaim. But here we are.
Right. Yeah. So tell us what happened.
With that story specifically. Okay. All right. So this is an issue that I'd been seeing popping up in the clown world that we've been living in for the past several years. We now live in stage 4 of clown world, but at this point maybe it was stage 2. And I was seeing these stories popping up in different sports where you are having biological males identifying as women or saying that they're transgender women and competing against biological women. I'd seen this happen in MMA with the whole Fallon Fox situation. I'd seen this happen in basketball, athletics, handball, a range of different sports. And obviously off the jump, I was like, all right, this is stupid. Also, this is something that I knew was going to happen because when people started making claims that you can simply be whatever you identify as, and a woman is anyone who identifies as a woman,
Right.
I was saying, and this is back in like 2015, 2016, I was like, well, you're just going to get dudes claiming to be women and going into their bathrooms and beating them in their sports and so on and so forth. And people were like, hey, you're being a conspiracy theorist. Never heard that one before. And, it's not going to go that far, so on and so forth. And I was like, yeah, well, obviously it will, because I tend to take things to their logical conclusion. And so the day I posted that, I'd seen two different stories coming out of two different places of biological males beating men beating women in their sports, right? Under the guise of identifying as women. I saw it happening a couple high school, college athletes, and then there was something else that happened in the same day. And out of curiosity, I was just like, I'm really good at deadlifting. Like I've got a really strong deadlift. And I was like, I wonder what the British women's deadlift record is in my weight class. So I just did a quick Google search. It turned out that it was, I think, around 210 or 215 kilos. And my best is 275. So I was like, oh, wow. Okay. I can
Easy.
smoke that. Yeah. Easy. I can smoke that. And so I actually was on my phone, and from a few days ago, I had no, actually, I think the video was actually from like 6 months prior. Anyway, I had a video on my phone from one of my previous training sessions of me deadlifting 230 kilos.
So
And
you didn't record that video
no, I didn't
specifically
record it
for the
specifically.
purpose.
No, it
Okay.
was already
So
it
it's
was
like you
already
weren't
on my
even
phone.
trying. You weren't even trying.
No, no, no. That's why the
Like
video is like well below my max. So I was just like, all right, well, here's just a video from one of my training sessions. And I just posted it with the caption. I wrote something like, I keep hearing about how biological men have no strength advantage over women in 2019. So watch me destroy the British women's deadlift record without trying. P.S. I identified as a woman whilst lifting the weight. Don't be a bigot. So I just posted that. I had on Twitter at the time, I had about 18,000 followers at the time I posted this. This is late February 2019. So, bit over 2.5 years ago.
hmm
And I put that out there thinking, okay, I think it's funny. So it'll probably get a few laughs, whatever. Within 10 minutes, the video had, I think, over 10,000 views. Within an
Wow.
hour, I think it had cracked 50,000. It kept growing and growing and growing. It was getting retweeted and liked. It was like, you know, 500 retweets, 1,000 retweets, 2,000, 3,000. This thing just
Wow.
kept going and growing. People were commenting in different languages.
Right.
It was getting retweeted by all these like big accounts. I was just like, what on earth is going on? By the time I went to bed that night on the same day, it had over 300,000 views. I woke up in the morning, it was over 500,000. This
Million.
thing just kept going. Like I'd had one semi-viral tweet before, but I'd never in my life seen something just taking on the life that this thing was. And this went on for weeks. This went on for ages. The following day, I started getting contacted by big media outlets, BBC, Sunday Times, like it's kind of RT, right? I start getting contact like, hey, like, we want to talk to you about this. Like, what's going on? So I start getting all these requests for media interviews and radio and TV and whatever. And so I'm just kind of stoking the fire for the next several weeks. Actually, I'm kind of just keeping going. I'm still putting out regular content, hit 20,000 followers, 20, 25, 30,000, right? Just things continue to grow. And I'm also introducing people to my music and my podcast and the things that I actually do, because there's obviously more to me than being the strongest woman at deadlifting in the UK. And so a lot of people, that was the catalyst through which they discovered me, but then they were able to kind of go down the
Right.
rabbit hole and discover what I
Yeah.
really do. And then I want to say about 3 weeks into this, I wake up in the morning and my phone is going crazy. I've got crazy messages on my phone. I've got DMs. I've got WhatsApp messages. I'm like, whoa, what's going on? And I'm seeing tons of people, yo, Joe Rogan, like mentions of Joe Rogan, JRE, Joe, like Joe Rogan just shouted you out. Joe Rogan mentioned you. And I was like, wait, what? Like, what's going on? And then, so I hear that Joe Rogan has like talked about me on his podcast, and I'm like, oh, wow, what's going on? So I go and I check out the episode. It was an episode with Brian Callen, and there's this whole segment in it where they just talk about this whole thing, and they go on my profile, and then Joe follows me and he like shouts me out on the thing. And then I
Yes.
go on Twitter and he's following me out on Twitter, and he sends me
Oh,
a
that's
DM
amazing.
just like, yo, man, I saw that video. That's the funniest thing I've ever seen. Like, that's amazing. Like, whatever. And so, Joe Rogan's now following at this point, and I'm just like, this is just crazy. And
You've been
then
on a show a couple times, right?
yeah, twice. Yeah. So the first one happened in September 2019. So the way that happened is because all of this kicked off, and then now he's been following me for a few months. And I was planning to go out to the USA. I got booked to do my friend Dave Rubin's show, The Rubin Report. And so that was out in LA. Rogan was still in LA at the time. And so I just DM'd him, was like, yo, bro, I'm going to be in LA in September. Would be an honor to go on your show if there's an opportunity. And he was like, hell yeah, like let's
Oh
let's
yeah.
do it. He's like, let me know when you're going to be here. And so I went out to the States with those two podcast bookings, and
Yeah.
I ended up staying there for 3 months, going to 11 different cities, doing tons of different podcasts and TV appearances and all of that. And that really helped to put a dent. That's when I had my first appearance on Tucker Carlson as well, the Ben
Yeah.
Shapiro show, Adam Carolla
Yes.
show, all
I
these
saw all of
things.
those.
Awesome. And so it just snowballed into something crazy. I mean, by the
Yeah.
time I was in DC, I got invited to the White House a couple times. I got invited to the
Wow.
Pentagon. Yeah, it was nuts. It went insane. And that was also the year that people in the USA discovered me. Because
Yeah.
up until this point, 10 plus years into my career, I'm just an independent rapper from the south of England with a primarily UK based audience that just knows me for my music. And so that's the long version of how that all happened.
Yeah. You're the kind of person that like I'm personally happy to see get a lot of exposure and get like the best podcast and be given a space to talk for hours. Like I was listening to your podcast and I didn't skip once. I was like absorbing everything you were saying. As you said, like you go down the rabbit hole of figuring out who Zuby actually is. Right. That initial video is like funny. It's good humor. It's very good humor if you get it. Did you ever like were there people who like did you receive any backlash from that? Were there people
Of course.
who were like, offended? There are always people that are offended.
Well, yeah. So there were two types of offense that happened. Number one was people who were trying to make the claim that it was somehow an attack on trans people or the LGBT community. as a whole, which didn't
Oh,
really work because I checkmated them in the tweet, right? Because I said, well, I'm identifying as a woman. So
right.
according to your own rules, I am a woman, right? So anyone who's saying like, hey, that's not really a woman, it's like, ooh, hang on, hold your transphobia, right? Those are your rules. Those are the rules you set up. So either they have to accept that I am the British women's deadlift record, the champion, or they have to say, hey, that's not actually a woman, in which case they violate their own argument. So some people wanted to get mad and they wanted to be offended, but they didn't really have a leg to stand on because there's nothing that they could say that wouldn't contradict their own position, right?
Right.
So there was that. And then there were also the people who sort of halfway got it. There were people who were like, hey, man, you're not really a woman. And what you did was
Completely
unfair.
missed the point.
What you did was unfair to women, and you're a piece of trash because you took
Yeah,
that title from a real woman. And what you did was not fair because you're not really a woman. So
exactly.
they they sort of got it, but they also totally missed it.
Yeah, they sort of got it.
Yeah.
Um, like that's what I love about humor these days is that there's always like a bitterness to it. That's what makes good humor these days. Like everything I see online that actually I find funny and is like makes me laugh is the kind of humor that's a little bitter because that's like like everything that's going on, like
Mm,
the current events that's going on in our time, in our era, is just so mind-boggling. And we can like expand on those a little bit,
if
but
you'd like to,
first,
sure.
yeah, if you don't mind, because I know you've talked about them a lot, so you must be a little over it. Are you
It's all
over
good.
talking about the same things?
Nah, it's all good. It's all good.
But I kind of want to like talk about your background a little bit because that's also interesting. You were raised in Saudi Arabia. You were born in England, but you were raised in Saudi Arabia, right?
Yeah,
How
that's
did that
correct.
happen?
Yeah, sure. So my family background is originally from Nigeria. Both my parents are originally from there. That's my ethnicity, Igbo specifically. And so my parents were living in the UK at the time when I was born. So I was born here in England. And then I don't remember this obviously because I was a baby, but my parents went back to Nigeria for some time, and I have four older siblings actually, and my dad got an opportunity. He's a medical doctor. He got a great job offer to work out in Saudi Arabia. And
Mm.
so the story goes, he kind of just came home one day and was like, "Hey, we're moving to Saudi Arabia." And I'm a baby. I have no awareness of any of this, but within a couple weeks, our family was packed up and headed out on a plane to Saudi. Um, and
What did your
so,
mom think of that? Because Saudi is not the best place for a woman. The fact that
uh,
your mom was like, "Okay, honey, let's pack up and go."
well, she's a beautiful, wonderful, wonderful wife and mother. So, she was fully on board, but she liked Saudi Arabia. She was,
Yeah.
yeah, was very respected there. And
Uh,
so, all my earliest memories are in Saudi. That's where it all started for me. I went to preschool there, kindergarten up until fifth grade. And then when I was 11, I actually went to boarding school from the age of 11. So I went out to the UK. My family was still in Saudi Arabia, but during term time, I was over in the UK for my studies. And then I'd go back to Saudi about 3 times a year. So Christmas, Easter, and summer. So from 11 up until 17, I was in boarding school over here in the UK. And then I did really well in school, got into Oxford, went to Oxford when I was 18, studied computer science, started my music career there, graduated when I was 20. And
mhm.
yeah, that was kind of that's a quick version. That's a quick version of the origin story. And when I was in Saudi, I went to an international school. So most of my teachers were American. Lots of my friends were American and stuff. So people always hear my voice and my accent and they're like, whoa, I thought you were going to sound British, or where's your accent from,
Oh,
or
that's
whatever.
why.
And that's why it's from growing up in Saudi. So I've never had an English accent at any point in my life. I used to sound 100% American, and it softened up a little bit when I came to the UK, but I probably still sound more American than I do British.
100%. And the fact that when you were in Saudi, you were attending American school.
Yeah, exactly.
So
So
all
I was
your
taught English. I was
right,
taught English from Americans.
right.
Yeah.
And then you went back to UK and you still didn't pick up a you just still didn't pick
No,
up
I
an
didn't want
accent.
to. I didn't want to. I'm a very hard person to influence.
Oh, I
Um,
see.
yeah, I tend to influence people around me more than the other way around. And even from the age of 11, I was like, I like my accent. I don't want to change it. And so I just was like, I made a decision. I literally made a conscious decision that I wasn't going to lose my accent. And I didn't. It softened up very slightly, of course. But no, I'm the only person in my family who has the accent that I do. Yeah.
You're the complete opposite of this one person I know who went over to UK for the summer, came back with a full-on British accent.
Yeah. Yeah. Some that happens with some people. It's people are just different, and some people want to as well. There's people who
Yeah.
like certain accents or don't, and they kind of try to pick them up or try to avoid them.
So, like, what are some things? Because so you've been in UK, you've been in Saudi. Have you lived anywhere else?
Um, Not long term. I've traveled a
Mm-hmm.
lot. I mean, I've been to I think about 36 or 37 different countries, but I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't say I've lived in any of them. I've spent a good amount of time in certain places. I've spent a month or two or three in certain countries. I know some people would consider
Yeah.
that living. For me, I don't. For me to live somewhere, I'd probably have to be at least 6 months for me to consider me living
Yeah.
somewhere. Um, but yeah, I've traveled a lot. I've traveled a lot all over lots of dozens of different countries in Europe, and then a few countries in the Middle East, USA, Canada, Mexico, like
Right.
Nigeria, of
Oh wow.
course, lot of different places.
So as someone who you were basically raised in Saudi and then went back to UK. So it's
Mm,
like, how was that transition? Because as I told you, I'm from Iran, which is a neighboring country.
mm,
And I always make that comparison in my mind where I think how culturally, politically, just different functionalities, because it's such different worlds. Everything is so different. I
mm.
always try to like compare, and it gives me like this perspective. So I want to kind of like ask you, how is that? Like, you obviously have like a global perspective. So how have you realized the differences in functionalities or culture? What has been like the biggest differences you've noticed?
Wow, it's a really big question. It's a good question, but that's a huge question. I think one thing that has given me so much perspective, which I'm able to offer through the different things that I do to other people, is the fact that I've grown up the way that I have. So most people don't actually travel much,
Hmm.
let alone, not even within their countries, let alone internationally. So, you know, having the opportunity from a very young age to experience and be exposed to very different countries and cultures. So just with my background and how I was raised, I was very heavily exposed to four different cultures. So British, American, Saudi, and American.
Nigerian.
So sorry. Oh, sorry.
Nigerian.
Oh, did I? Oh, I sorry. I said
You
British.
said
Did I say
American
American
twice.
twice? My
Yeah.
bad. British, American, Nigerian, and Saudi, of course.
Saudi.
Um, so, and those are really different. Like those are
Yeah.
all of those are
Oh
pretty
yeah.
different from each other. Even British and American are more different than people give them credit to.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that from the beginning just helped me to understand that there are different ways of doing everything in society, culturally, societally, religiously, politically, everything. Not just the surface level things like food and the
For
way people
sure.
dress, although that's also
Yeah.
interesting, food, dress, language, all of that stuff, but just the whole value system and the way that societies are set up, and the way that has an impact on the way people perceive things and their beliefs and so on. So for me, from the beginning, because I was just in that, it was like normal to me, and they were all normal to me. So I understood, okay, this is how they do things in Saudi, this is how they do, this is how the Americans do things, this is how it is in the UK, this is how it is in Nigeria. So that really has given me opportunity to, I guess, see the pros and cons of the different things and to have a lot more nuance than most people have, or perhaps even
Mm-hmm.
have access to, right?
Right.
People like to paint in black and white. They like to
Mm-hmm.
just see, take a country like Saudi Arabia as well, probably one of the most controversial countries in the world,
Mm-hmm.
right? So a lot of people in the West, a lot of people in the UK, America, Canada, Australia, Western Europe, right? They have this. Firstly, almost none of them have ever been to Saudi Arabia, which is interesting,
True.
right? So most people don't have a strong opinion. Like if you ask most people, oh, what's your view on Estonia, or what's your view on Kazakhstan? Most people don't have an opinion, right? If you ask people their view on Saudi Arabia, a lot of people have a real strong opinion, right? Even though they don't know very much about it at all.
It's what
And
they get from media, right? So it's like if you ask
absolutely,
people what they know about Kazakhstan, it's probably what they got from the movie Borat.
yes, exactly. Literally, that's probably their only frame of reference. Yeah, that's probably literally their only frame of reference, right?
Right.
But most people would have the humility to say, I don't really know anything about it, right?
Right.
Whereas with Saudi, I mean, I've had debates with people where they're lecturing me on the country, and I'm like, when did you go? And they're like, oh, I've never been there. I wouldn't even go there. And I'm like, okay, so I lived there for 20 years, and you're lecturing me about stuff, and you're saying stuff that is categorically false in some cases, or you're just kind of lumping all the countries together, right? They might think
Yeah.
Saudi and Iran
And
and like
Iran, yeah.
they're all the
All the
same
same
country, right?
thing.
Yeah, exactly. They
Mm-hmm.
think it's all the same thing. So people speak
100%.
very confidently from a place of ignorance. And also, it's one of those countries where people tend to only know the negative. And of course, there are
Mm-hmm.
negatives, right? And I have my
Of course.
criticisms of, every country. I absolutely have criticisms of the way certain things are done in Saudi Arabia. But to view it as simple black and white, as in, USA great, Saudi Arabia terrible, or whatever it is, it's just like, it's such an,
Lazy way.
it's a really ignorant and lazy
Yeah.
perspective, right? There are certain things that are absolutely better in the West, no question, right? And there
Right.
are, there's a lot of things I like about the Western world. I also have huge criticisms about the Western world, especially in the modern era that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
But there's wonderful things here, and then there's wonderful things. So you see the different shades of gray and the different
Mm-hmm.
colors, and you have the experience of being able to separate, say, the people from the government. This is another thing. Saudi Arabia is another
Mm-hmm.
country where people tend to judge the whole country based on how they feel about the government,
Yes. Same with
right?
Iran. Yeah.
Exactly, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's, I don't know, people might do this with China too. They might say, oh, well, like the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, I don't like them, so therefore China is this thing, right? But if you think, like, is there any country, I mean, do you want people to judge the USA and Americans based off of your
Right.
politicians and your
It's a great
foreign
question.
policy, and right? Like, no, you wouldn't.
No.
And right, if so, exactly, right. So if someone were to just be like, oh, well, those Americans, like, it's just this, you'd be like, well, that's not actually
Oh.
what, if you go out to the USA, you talk to people on the street, like, some of them will be more, they're more critical of their own government than you are, right?
Yeah.
So
If
that's the,
anything, if anything, sorry to interrupt, but if
go ahead.
anything, I would say the States is actually people are a lot more, the government is a lot more representative of the people than a country like, let's say, Iran or Saudi. Like in countries
Possibly.
like over there are people, like there are a lot of people, like I don't know if I would say majority. With Iran,
Mm,
I would probably be able to say majority. I don't know that much about Saudi, but
mm.
like somewhere like Iran, I would say majority of the country is not with the government.
That's
I
interesting.
hope. Yeah.
In Saudi, I don't think it's a majority.
Yeah,
People,
Saudi, I don't
yeah,
think so either.
In Saudi, people tend to be pretty supportive of the government and the royal family, and that,
Yeah.
and but that doesn't mean that, they don't have any criticisms or anything like that. But again,
True.
it's just, if, look, anytime you try to judge millions upon millions of people, tens, hundreds of millions of people, based off of, a handful, or based off lazy stereotypes or prejudices or certain stories in the media or whatever, you're always going to be way off. You're always going to
True.
be way off. And I think people do this a lot because it's what you used the term before. It's actually a term I use a lot, which is lazy thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just lazy thinking. And I think that human beings don't really like exerting effort, both physically and
Mm-hmm.
mentally, right? We try to
Yeah.
reserve our energy. And so I think people like labels, and people like binary thinking, and people like false dichotomies, and people like
Heuristics, like they're just
stereotypes. And
easy.
exactly, exactly. It's just easy. It's easier to navigate the world just thinking, okay, this thing good, that thing bad,
Yeah.
this thing my team, that thing their team,
Yeah.
whatever, and people do this with everything.
With everything.
And you have to constantly fight that urge, and none of us are perfect at it, right? I'm not saying that I never do this. We all have our heuristics and whatever, and we all have our biases and perhaps prejudices, etc. But if you keep that in check, and you just recognize the shades of gray and the nuance and the individuality, especially if you're talking about human beings, then it leads to, I think, a much more healthy worldview. It makes you more open, allows you to have better conversations, and so on.
I agree.
So I don't even know if I answered the original question there, but that was
It's
some
okay.
thoughts.
It's okay. I like where we're going. So, also, at least a lot of the Western countries, like, obviously the States is okay, you get to vote, the votes get counted. And I mean, I know a lot of people would disagree with this, but there's a more the definition of democracy is definitely a lot easier to see here than it is
Mm.
over there. Like votes don't we don't people don't vote over there. Like the government decides
When
who's
are you
gonna
talking
do
about
what.
Iran?
Yes.
Okay.
What is it like in Saudi? Is
I
it,
mean,
would
it's
you
it's
say
a
it's
it's a
a
monarch it's a monarchy. There's
it's a
no there's
monarchy?
no
Yeah, you
political
guys,
parties. Yeah.
yeah. So that's
There's no voting.
right. So
Yeah,
that's
it's not a democracy, so it's not.
right. Yeah,
And
yeah,
and
yeah.
that's
In
also
that sense,
interesting, right? Because
yeah.
that's a
It just
whole
makes it
different.
easier. At least they're honest about it. At least they're honest about it, you know?
Yeah, but
They're like, this is it. We're going to decide for you. You don't get a
yeah.
say. At least we'll give you some of the oil money we make, which
Hmm.
is like, they don't even do that in Iran. But Saudi's at least like very nice about that. But this is another thing I've noticed, that I feel like Saudi people do like their government. I've been to Saudi people's homes in the
Mm.
States, and they
Okay.
have pictures of the royal family up on their walls,
Hmm.
like big pictures of the
Hmm.
royal family, like next to the picture of their dad. And I'm like,
Hmm.
wow, you guys like really like your government.
They do,
So yeah,
yeah. MBS, he's very, very popular, especially with young Saudis. And he's
yeah,
also
yes, yeah,
he's liberalized it a little bit. I mean, I left Saudi
yes,
in 2008, and so I haven't been back there since. So it seems that in the 13 years since I was in the country, things have changed. Women can
yeah,
drive now.
yes. I
They
heard that. That
they
was
have
only
cinemas
a
now. They
couple
have
of years
music
ago.
concerts now. Yeah,
What?
I think it was 2018. It was
Yeah,
2018. They
yeah,
changed that. They desegregated the restaurants. Um, so some of those things were, again, growing up there and living there. That was, again, there were certain things where it's just like, okay, like this is how they do things. But even some of that has changed. I'd love to go back there now. I mean, they have tourist visas now. They never used to have tourist visas, right? They
right.
introduced the tourist visas just a few years ago. So even being able to just go and visit, you didn't used to be able to visit Saudi unless you lived there or worked there. Like, you couldn't go, really. Like, it was very, very hard country to get into. But now they actually issue tourist visas. So it is changing, and I'd say those are all changes for the better. I think there's a balance to be struck between what people call liberalism and conservatism. And I think that it's hard for human beings to strike a right balance and equilibrium in virtually anything, especially when you put millions of us together in one place.
Yeah,
But I think that that's where you always end up with the right balance, not going too far, too extreme in any direction, whether that is, freedom versus, you know, right now we're trapped in a big battle of freedom versus safety, right? Or
yes,
I'd say freedom versus the illusion of safety, right?
yes,
And you've got the freedom and liberty minded people, and you've got the safety and security minded people. And as we've learned, when stuff hits the fan, whether truly or in a manufactured or combination of these ways, then these groups of people struggle to get along. in fact. And this is a big fight that's been happening over the past 2 years. People perhaps thought that a so-called global pandemic would bring people together, but as you've seen, this has probably been one of the most divisive things in our entire lifetimes. And that's a shame, but it also just it's highlighted some really interesting things about human psychology.
Yeah. Well, there was something I wanted to go back to before we go into that. I
Please
was
do.
gonna ask you, just to wrap up what we were talking about previously. What are some things, because it's obvious the things that we think the Western world does better than, like, let's say countries like Iran or Saudi. But in your experience, what have been some of the things that you think is better over there, or they do it in a better way?
Oh, easy. Okay. Family,
Mm, mm.
the institution of family and the
Not
strength of
many, yeah,
family.
not many dads leave over there.
No, I think the biggest problem in the modern Western world is fatherlessness and the breakdown of the
Yeah.
family. I think that's
Mhm.
the biggest problem. And
Yeah.
virtually everything else is downstream of there. All these social ills, lots of elements of poverty and crime, and lots of the social ills, homelessness that you see in countries like the USA,
Yeah.
or even in places like the UK. I think the USA is a little further down the stream in this one. Then that's what it all goes back to. That's what a lot of it
Yeah.
goes back to. Not all of it. It's not the only problem out there, but I think it's the biggest problem. And it's also one that nobody wants to talk about. So I think when it comes to the traditional family unit and people getting married and staying together and looking after their kids and taking care of their loved ones and not abandoning them, then, you know, that is way better. That's way better in Saudi. It's also way better in Nigeria than it is in the modern West. And it's a shame because the West used to be good at this. But in the past 50 to 60 years, it's really, really gotten decimated. So
Right.
that's a big one.
Like,
I,
the only
yeah,
single
go ahead.
moms you see over there, the only single moms you see are the women whose husbands have died,
Like
or
widows.
or widows, or like their husbands have like gone to prison.
Hmm.
It's not an option for a father to like leave, you know?
No,
But like
no. And
here it's like an option. It's like, oh, if you don't want to, you don't have to,
mhm.
you know?
Mm-hmm. And think of all the
No.
problems that come downstream of that and the generational issues that it causes. So that's a huge one right off the bat. Um, for some people, depending on their view, they'll view this as, you know, a pro or a con or both, and I can understand both sides of it. But I think that having a how would I put this one? All right, let me do a different one first. So it's a very God fearing country.
Yes.
Okay. And this does have an impact on people's morality and the way that they look at society and community, their own behavior, etc. Sometimes, again, in the modern Western era, we're living in this time of inversion and kind of anything goes, you know, very
Yeah.
highly subjective morals. Like everything is, you know, you can just do anything, you can say anything, you're like, whatever, you know, just
Because
total.
freedom.
Yeah, exactly. But it's this sort of freedom that leads to bondage in a way, right? And I'm not saying that I'm very libertarian, right? So I'm not here
Yeah.
saying that there should be laws for this and there should be laws for that. But actually, if people have a very strong moral framework, regardless of, you know, I'm not saying somebody has to believe in God or follow a traditional religion to have a strong moral framework, but I certainly think that as an individual and certainly as a wider society, as a nation, having everybody on that same page makes things a lot easier and more straightforward and more objective. It's not like
Yeah.
you've got everyone trying to live their truth
There.
and with
Yeah.
their thing, right? It's so yes, I understand. Again, I'm libertarian, so I'm very big on individualism, and people should be
Yeah.
able to express that. And you don't want to suppress creativity and all that. But I can also see the advantage and the benefit of having people who adhere to a certain code and way of living and
A
belief system,
structure.
a structure, right? A system of right and wrong, morality, good and bad. You know, this is a
Yeah.
good deed, this is a sin, so on and so forth. So that's that. And I find
Yeah.
it also makes people I found people over there very trustworthy. That's just something I generally found. People were very trustworthy and honest. Because again, if you believe that God is watching all your moves, then you are more
Mm-hmm.
likely to you're less likely to want to, fleece somebody or scam somebody or be dishonest in the way that you conduct yourself. And I think that that filters throughout the society. Um,
Yeah.
as a result of some of these things, there are things that are huge problems in the West that just aren't big problems over there. So, you know, huge thing. I mean, you're in LA, homelessness,
Uh,
drug drug abuse. Okay, Saudi Arabia doesn't have to worry about these problems.
or like alcoholism.
Yeah, doesn't have to worry about them.
Well,
So
it's illegal over there, so it makes it a little easier.
yeah, exactly, right. So this is the thing. So again, this is interesting for someone like me because, as I've said before, politically, I tend to lean pretty libertarian, but that doesn't mean that I think everything should be done or is good, right? I think having a light touch of the government is ideal. I think my sort of like, I don't believe in utopian thinking, but if I had a utopia, you would have very few laws, but you would have very, very strong morals and
Yes.
societal codes,
Yeah.
which means that, okay, you're not relying on the force of the government and the state and the threat of being locked up in jail for everything, but you understand that, okay, like there's a way to behave and there's things I should do and there's things I shouldn't do. There's a way to conduct myself. So coming back to the point, I mean, those type of issues, which are big, big, big problems in the USA, in the UK, et cetera, those are just they're non-issues over there.
Yeah.
Like it's even the concept of having mass homelessness wouldn't even make sense to a Saudi, because they're like, well, why where's this person's family? Right? Where's this,
Yes.
right? So the notion that you can even become homeless is kind of a foreign concept in some cultures, because it's like, well, everyone has a family, so
Right.
is this person like an orphan? Did they lose all their, right? Like,
Like,
why
what
isn't,
happened to you?
yeah,
Why?
like, where are your parents? Where's your brother? Where's your sister? Yeah, you see what I mean? And in the
That's
West,
so
people don't even,
true.
so many people don't even think that way. Some people do, but so many people don't even think that way. It's just like, oh, like whatever. And then even in terms of the way the government treats the citizens, um, the government in Saudi does look out for people, right?
They
They
do.
have got, and it's a weird combination of things, because
They
yeah, it's
really
not a
do, yeah.
democracy, but then you have it's this weird combination. So you have like no taxes, right? But then you have like
Wow.
free healthcare, and it's actually free because there's no taxes. And then you have free education. They'll even pay for you to go to college, if for many citizens. Um, and so there's this sort of, the people are looked after more in many ways. And again, depending on one's
Mm.
philosophy and position, you may think that's, you know, ideal. You may think, oh no, that's not good. But it's kind of just depending on what lens I look at it through, I see different things. But this is the whole point of just saying, like, there's this nuance, and it's not as simple as
Mhm.
just like, okay, it's just this or it's just that. In the West, even, people are very into like left and right thinking, especially politically, because everything, political parties, labor and conservative, or Democrat and Republican. It's this binary left, right, liberal, conservative thing. But then you have a country like Saudi where that's just exploded. It's not like a thing. And it's just, yes, it is authoritarian in many regards, in the way that, there's some countries that are much more authoritarian, but then they also have certain ideas which like no one in their right mind would call Saudi Arabia a progressive country, but
No.
they have certain things such as free healthcare and free education, which are things that progressives in the USA are like,
Would want.
yeah, would want and we're striving for. And then they have things like, oh, no taxes, which
You just
people are
don't
like,
get to have it all. You just don't get
yeah,
to have it all. Either it's a authoritarian country where everything's chosen for you, you barely have any freedom, but then you are given certain things also,
mm,
for free, like free healthcare, free education. Or it's like a European country where, like, yeah, you have free healthcare, free education, but you also have 50% tax,
yeah, so it's not
right?
free. So it's not free.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. Or it's like the States where it's like, we're really just trying to figure everything out still.
Yeah. Yeah. So those are a couple things. Those are a
We're
couple
very
things off the
young.
top of my head. Yeah, absolutely. The USA, I
We're
would say the
young.
USA is a teenager as far as
Yeah.
countries go. So those would be a couple things, couple pretty big points, I'd say, okay, so these are things where a country like the USA could look at Saudi and go, okay, let's be honest. Let's not be USA number one all the time, right? Let's look at this with some. Let's look at this with an eye and see, okay, what could we maybe learn from the way certain things are done here? Is there something that, because someone will just hear Saudi and they're like, no, the USA is better at everything. Like USA. By the way, it's also funny because Americans who go to work there like never want to leave.
Really?
Oh my gosh, like people who move there, like, I mean, there's tons of thousands and thousands of people from the West go there to work, right? And oftentimes people will go there in their mind thinking, oh, I'll just go for like 1 or 2 years. And then they're like, oh no, I'm moving my whole family over here. And then they end up staying for like 15 or 20 years.
It's just
That
like
happens all the time.
as a woman though, I take a little bit of offense for the way they treat women. Not a little bit of offense. I take a lot of offense. Just because like you have no choice. And not even like what you wear. You don't have freedom of speech. You don't have freedom of religion. I don't think you don't have, right? You can't.
It's not unique to women.
Yeah. No. For women, it's like what you wear, and like also like a lot of the rights that men have, you don't have.
I think
Still,
it's also
compared to a man, you're still looked at as secondary, as less than. People still don't take you seriously at all if you're a woman.
I
I
think it
mean,
depends on. Sorry to jump in. I think with a country like Saudi, and I think this goes for most of the Gulf states, is it's
yeah,
important to remember, and I think it's probably important to clarify on this podcast that there's going to be a big difference, certainly a significant difference between the experience of a foreigner, an expat,
yeah,
versus a native, right? An American woman living in Saudi Arabia in a primarily expat community is not going to have the same experience as a born and raised native Saudi woman.
very true.
And also, it's even deeper than that because in any country, in any city, in any place, no two people living in the USA have the exact same. There's not one experience of the USA, right? So you could have one experience of the USA and then someone else has like a totally opposite different thing depending on their circumstances and depending on what they want. So
Yeah,
it's not, again, it's just not as clear cut as a lot of people think it is. I'm actually followed by quite a lot of Saudi women on social media, and I've actually had some clips from certain podcasts go viral in Saudi Arabia, right?
wow.
Where people have seen it's been translated and put the subtitles in Arabic, and then in like Saudi Twitter, it's gone viral, and I've gained a ton of followers in Saudi Arabia, especially because this is one of my most controversial things, right? Because so many people in the West have this very black and white view of Saudi, so I get a lot of angry comments about me defending Saudi Arabia or praising Saudi Arabia, as some people like to say, etc. Because people want me to just outright, do the Western thing and just condemn the whole country as a whole and
Oh
say
my
there's nothing
God.
good about it. And right, that's kind of what people want, right? And so they hate the fact that I have this
So
nuanced
hateful.
view
Yeah.
and that I have some positive things to say. Yes, I have my criticisms, but I don't just
Yeah.
talk about criticisms. I'm saying, look, it's not as simple. I lived there. I lived there for 20
Yeah.
years. Yes, I was an expat, so I'm not saying that my view is going to be the same as, you know, everyone else there or someone who grew up natively. But it's like, why don't you talk to these people? And, I am followed by I've received quite a few DMs from native Saudi women who have said like, thank you for talking about our country fairly, right? Like, I'm not, these Western women are making it sound like I'm some slave who's living in a cage and I can't do this and I can't do that. They're like, I love it here. I'm happy here. This is my country. This is my home. Like, I can do all the things that I actually want to do, whatever. I don't feel oppressed,
But it's
like they
like,
just don't get us.
I get that. I get that.
Mm.
But it's like, but that same person, that same woman who says that, it's like, do you think that they would change anything about it if they could? Like, if they had a
I think,
magic wand, would they
look,
want to have freedom over what they get to wear in 108 degrees? Because it gets really freaking hot over there.
it
So it's
does.
like, do you think they would change that, or do you think they would still choose to dress the way they do?
It's an excellent question. Firstly, I think it's important for people to remember that the men in Saudi also cover up.
They wear a white dress. True.
Yeah, the women wear a black one, the men wear a white one.
They don't wear. Yeah. They don't cover
The
their
men,
heads. They
it's
don't
called a
cover their
thobe.
faces.
They do cover their heads. They cover their heads with a gutra and a kafaya.
They don't cover their faces.
Most of the young women don't either.
So you don't have to cover your face as a woman
No,
in Saudi?
no.
What
Not even
constitutes
when I
whether you
not
have
when I
to
was
cover?
not when I was living there either.
So
Not when I was living there
who
either.
are the ones that cover, and why do they cover their faces?
The more traditional Orthodox,
Okay,
religious
okay.
married women typically
Yeah,
will. Married women especially,
okay.
or just strongly religious women. I mean, there's
Strongly
there's there's
religious.
there's Muslim women in England who
Yeah,
cover their
yeah,
faces.
yeah.
There's a lot of people who cover their faces these days. So you're in LA. You can't talk about oppressive face coverings. You're in LA. I was having people try to get me to cover up my face when I was out there. So I don't know what kind of freedom you're talking about. I
Right.
never had anyone in my whole time in Saudi. No one ever told me to cover my face. So
KO'd.
yeah. So yeah. Yeah, actually, the West has no foot to stand on that one anymore. Like the West, they're like, it's
You're
horrible.
right.
They make women cover their faces in public. It's like, oh, do they?
Look at yourself now.
Yeah, exactly. I've
Double
actually posted.
masking and
Yeah,
all with a
exactly. Yeah.
shield. Like, what
I've
are you
actually posted
doing?
about that before, just like that comparison, and it makes people so angry because they're like, "Well, this is about science," and
That
I'm like,
is hilarious.
"Is it
You're
about
like,
science?"
well, then that's just differences of beliefs. What makes you think what you believe in is any better than what they believe in? Right?
It's
It's
got
just
that magic
differences of
science
belief.
word. Yeah, I'm like, look, if you guys just said it was religious, then I'd actually be more accepting.
That's
But the fact you keep trying to
hilarious.
pass it off as science, like while you're wearing 3 masks outside, I'm not convinced that's science.
That's hilarious
Um,
that you just made that comparison.
I like making comparisons that are that yeah, people don't naturally tend to draw. So
Yeah.
I mean, but look, I actually want to have I had a Saudi guy on my podcast, a guy named Knife Harby. We had a really good chat. I actually want to. There was a time I was gonna do it because I wanted to get a Saudi woman who's like from Saudi on my podcast just to actually
Oh,
share,
yes.
yeah, to share that whole perspective, because I don't think it's a side of things that a lot of people hear. And of course, this is only
Yeah.
going to be one person's experience, but anytime I mention Saudi on Twitter, especially, then it's such a mess in the comment section. And of course, I
It
get
is.
people like, oh, well, you're a man, so your experience is different. Like, oh, they'll be like, oh, well, what about your sister? What about your mother? I'm like, they both, I have 2 sisters and a mother, and they lived in Saudi for 20 years and they liked it too, And they're like, yeah, well, talk to an actual Saudi woman. I'm like, I have, and I do. I haven't
They're
spoken to
fine.
all. I haven't spoken to all of them. Of course, there's going to be ones who think, look, let's. I mean, think about it. I mean, look at the different versions you have of what people say about what life is like for Black people in America. Okay, you have people who will say that like being Black in America, even in 2021, is like you are literally constantly the victim of racism and police brutality and structural and systemic and institutional race and what like there's people who like the picture is like, holy crap, like, oh my gosh, like America, they paint the picture like the USA is like horribly racist against Black people like now, and it's
Like it was
very
100 years ago.
yeah, like people talk like that now. I've had people talking, they're like, Black people are being lynched in the streets and this, and I'm like, what are you talking about, right? Or with the police stuff, like the police just drive around LA just shooting Black people,
Shooting
or
the
yeah, but that's how some people's view of it is. And I've even spoken to certain Black Americans who are talking that way, and I'm like, whoa, like what do you what are you guys talking, like? Even to me, I'm like, wait, I've been to the USA, and what you're saying doesn't sound aligned with my experience. Like maybe you grew up in like a really weird place, you had some weird experiences, or maybe you're exaggerating or this and that, but what I'm saying is like people just have really different experiences and perspectives. And I'm sure you can absolutely find many women in Saudi who have horror stories and who have experienced true oppression and who have been, in their society or in the city they grew up in or whatever, or even the family that they're in, they've really had the whole second class citizen, horrible, highly, like stupidly restricted treatment. Of
Right. But
course.
it's not to be
Of course.
generalized.
Yeah. But you can also talk to Saudi women in Riyadh or Jeddah or Medina or whatever, and they're like,
Who are
what are you guys talking about?
educated.
Yeah, like what are you guys talking about? Like I'm good. I went out. I went to the UK and studied, and I came back, and I can do this and I can do that, and you know it's
Yeah.
it's fine. I don't have to cover my
Yeah.
face in public. Like you know, I dress modestly, but I don't have to cover up.
Yeah.
And so
I get that.
yeah, it's a mix, but
Perspective. Yeah.
yeah, it's a mix, but I think it's good. It's always good to talk to different people, get a range of perspectives, and then at least look. I think if people are going to have conclusions, at least draw them from the greatest pool of information
Yeah.
possible. Don't talk to one person and then be like, okay, I got it. I got the UK figured out. I spoke to a guy from England,
Or
and
to a
I now
specific class,
yeah
that selection bias. If you're just talking
yeah
to, like a specific, type of person. You pointed out a really good um, factor that I think is really important. I've talked about it before with people who have asked me about my experience, like being born and raised in Iran. You said it's very different when, as an American woman, or someone who has been living their life in
mm,
a Western country, and then you go to one of these countries, you start making those comparisons based on the perspective that you were raised with and you're used to.
mhm,
And the people who are from there and come here do the same thing. You make those comparisons. But you made a point where you're like, it's very different for a woman who has been born and raised there, and that's what they're used to. They don't think about it the same way that, like, let's say an American woman going over there, because you're constantly making those comparisons. In my own case, I remember when, like, I was born and raised there. I moved to the States when I was 18,
okay.
and I'm 28 now. I've been back twice since I've moved here. When I tell you, the the last time I went back there, like, I remember this one time I broke down and I cried in the middle of, of a post office, of like just how, like, I couldn't figure things out. Like,
Mm,
I was born and raised there for 18 years. I am fully Persian. Like, I'm fluent in my language. I understand everything. Like, I wasn't new there or anything. But just the fact that I had lived here for so long and then went over there, it was driving me crazy.
what
But
aspect
when
of it?
I but like when I used to, I'll tell you in a sec. But like when
Mm,
I used to live there, everything seemed fine. Like, I didn't feel like, oh my God, we're living in hell and everything is so insane over here and we're so behind. Like, you have a sense of how different the rest of the world is, especially because, like, you have satellite TV.
mm,
I had so many family members who live in Germany and the States, so they would always like come for summer, or we would travel, or like obviously like we had the internet and everything. So it's like you have a good grasp of like how different things are, but also that's what you're used to, and that's everybody around you, like all your friends, and like, if you have like family. I didn't really over there. So it's like everyone's on the same page. Everyone like kind of like, lives the same, uh, you know, reality, at least the ones that like are around you.
mm,
But then you live here, and then you go back and you're like, oh shoot, it's very, and then it becomes this, like, when I went last time I went there, I was thinking I would not be able to live here
mm,
anymore. Like, as now that I've like lived in the States, if I were to go back and like live there, I wouldn't be able to. So
mm,
like, then the question you asked, what was the reason, is I was trying to mail something from Iran to Mexico, which should be a pretty easy process if it was to happen in the States.
mm,
However, over there, it's like office work is, forget it. Like, completely forget about it, because like people work when they want to,
Mm.
and like nobody, like, just the way office work happens and works over there is not like here. Like here people work, they want to help you, they're held responsible. Over there it's not really like that. Like I went to the post office, I was trying to like mail something to Mexico, and the first person I went to, he was like, yeah, go talk to that other person. That other person was like, yeah, go talk to that other person. They would like, he passed me around because nobody wanted to do it.
Mm.
And then at the end, they told me if you get like priority mail, it'll get there in 10 to 15 days.
Okay.
It got there 3 months later. 3 months later. I thought it just got like lost.
Yeah.
And then it got there 3 months later. So it's just like, it's annoying. But when you live there, it's normal.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
you just like, you figure it out. You're used to it. You know
Yep.
how to handle. But here you're like, oh, I would just go to the post office and I would just hand it to them. And then I would like come easy, you know, you're used to that. So it was very frustrating
Some
for
of that,
me.
some of that is just like the sort of, developed country versus developing country dichotomy.
True.
I don't think it's specifically unique to Iran. It's like there's a lot of countries. There's a lot of countries where you'd have a very similar experience trying to mail something, especially internationally. And one of the big advantages of developed countries, as we call them, is that most stuff just works. And
Mm-hmm.
until you go somewhere where things don't just work. And by the way, I'm talking about everything from running water to electricity to the
Yeah.
internet to postal systems to roads that aren't full of holes to a functioning police system, so on and so forth. In the West, you get so used to these things just working.
Yeah.
You know that you turn on the light switch and the light is gonna come on. That I mean, look at the way people respond when the Wi-Fi goes out temporarily, right? They act like, you know, and so that's
Or
great.
like the lights, like our
Mm,
light, like
hmm.
would go out just
Oh yeah.
like norm. It was like such a
Oh yeah.
normal thing for
Oh yeah. It's
like
like that. It's
light
like
to
that
go
in
out.
Nigeria. Yeah, it's like that several
Yeah.
times a day. Like
Yeah.
no one expects to have light. No
Like,
one
so
expects to
now
have
we're gonna
light
talk
all
to
the time.
each other.
Yeah, yeah. And so, and this is a funny thing. This leads to something I think about a lot, which is the again I was talking before about like human beings trying to be able to find this equilibrium, and we're not good at it. And I
Right.
think that whilst creature comforts are great, and of course we want the water to run when we turn the tap, we want the power to come on when we flick the switch, and so on and so forth, and all these things should work that way. But I think we've reached a stage just in the past few decades in the modern West where most of the problems we have are problems of surplus.
Yeah.
They're problems of people being too
Too
comfortable,
comfortable.
and then they become both weak mentally, weak physically, weak spiritually, weak emotionally, right? I mean, imagine
Yeah.
I was gonna it's actually in my draft folder. And look, and I don't want to look, there might be someone listening to this who's had a bad time with COVID, or knows someone who got hospitalized or even passed away, and I don't want to make light about anyone who was harmed seriously by this virus. I myself know people who passed away with the virus. But imagine trying to explain this pandemic situation for the past 2 years. Imagine trying to explain this to someone in like 1940, right? And imagine that they'd be like, okay, like imagine they're like, oh, there's this deadly pandemic going on, and
Oh, sickness.
the
Yeah.
world has been yeah, but the world has been shut down. Like think of what questions they'd ask. They'd be like, oh, is it how many kids is it killing? Is it killing all the kids? You're like, no, it doesn't affect kids.
Uh-uh.
Okay, well, what's the death rate? Like 10%, 20%? You're like 0 point
Yeah.
0
Like
zero
less than
point zero 5, right?
2%.
Under It's definitely under 1%,
Under
like
1%.
under 0.001% for young people who are out. They'd be like, okay, and you're explaining all the measures being taken, and they're like, all right, what's the average age of death? They're like, about 80. They'd be like, They'd be like, wait, I thought you told me there was a
So
deadly
y'all are
pandemic.
crazy.
They'll be like, wait, so you destroyed like you took kids out of school for a year, you locked people in their houses, you smashed like all the freedoms and rights that like we're fighting for.
Businesses were
Right?
ruined.
You ruined businesses, you shut all this down, you did all, you got people running around with their faces covered for that. They'd be like, you people are crazy. This is the way that lots of people in Africa look at COVID, right? They're looking at the situation like, what is even going on? I mean, for the past 2 years, like all the 50 plus countries in Africa have pretty much been chilling. Like they're not getting vaccines, they're not doing lockdowns, they're just ticking on with life. And they're watching the West, they're watching these countries, Australia, Canada, Germany, UK, USA, they're watching these countries freaking out. And they're like, what's wrong with you people? Like, have you never even encountered a disease before? Have you guys heard of malaria? Have you guys heard of like actual diseases? And it's wild. I mean, if you look at a country like the USA, what's one of the biggest killers in the country? Obesity. People are eating so much food that it's killing them, right? Go back, look at developing countries, or just go back a few decades ago. What was the killer? Starvation, right? There's not enough food to go around. Now you've gone from people dying of starvation to people dying of obesity, overconsumption. You're eating so much food that you're literally killing yourself. Like if you think about it, that's crazy. If you think of like human history, that whole concept of eating so much food that you kill yourself, like what?
Yeah.
Like it's bonkers. But then you think about the impact on people's like mental state and emotionality and all of that, right? People being offended by, we live in this offense culture. Everything is offensive. We need safe spaces and trigger warnings. And, oh, you can't, that word is words of violence and this and that. And it's just like, man, people are so soft. People are
One bunch of weak bitches.
Straight up, right? People have become so weak, right? And it's just like, what is it's just wild to me. And I think that's we need to find the balance between struggle and challenge and difficulty and comfort, right? I'm not saying I want to go back to a time where we have to deal with constant famines and droughts and everything being horrible, right? But there's surely a balance between taking advantage of some of these modern technologies and comforts and also not allowing ourselves to become complete weaklings and pansies, both physically and mentally.
It's like, let's find the sweet spot. It sounds easy. I shared this post. I think Joe Rogan posted it, and I shared it on my story, and then I like made it into this like 3 posts because like I couldn't just like let it go. I had like so much to say about it. But it was something about that. It was like what was it? I want to find it. But it's basically saying that like hard times create strong people, right? Like just thinking about like the previous generations. Like we're not even going so far where we're like thinking like, crazy like famine and like fires and fatigue and stuff like that. If you just like go 2 generations past, like we had like wars, life was so much harder. People really had to be a lot more socially intelligent. They had to have like stronger family bonds. You had to make connections and stick with each other and help each other figure out the difficulties of life, right? We don't have any of that. Like food is not hard to find anymore. There's not real scarcity anymore. No. Everything is just easy to get. Food's easy to get. Mates are easy to find. Like there are apps you can find, like everything is so easy. Everything is so easy.
You got one of these and you don't even need to, you could literally, I could sit in this chair. I'm not going to do this, but I could sit in this chair.
You can have food come to you.
I could run my life. I could run my life for the next 10 years, provided I have battery. Provided I have battery, right? I can stay fed. I can get everything I need. I can earn money. I can do everything.
Yeah, and if you get enough money, you can even get women to come to you where you're sitting. So you don't have to move at all.
I know, maybe I want a massage. I'm just like, all right, just come around and give me a
Yeah.
massage. It's wild though. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the thing is, we human beings are the same species we've always been. So in those generations, we're the same people. We're the same. Like genetically, we are identical. All that's changed is the tech. We've just got better stuff. We have more stuff. And the speed at which technology is evolving versus the speed at which humans are evolving, which is like not happening, is mind blowing. And we forget that this is only 15 years old. We've only had these for 15 years. That is nothing, right? And now we live in a time where, I mean, imagine if all smartphones disappeared tomorrow. What on earth? Like people wouldn't even be able to function. No one, look, I'll
I
tell you
would
how
love
bad it's
for
gotten.
that to happen.
I'll tell you how bad it's gotten. And I am fully incriminating myself with this. I don't know anybody's phone numbers.
I don't either.
I used to know people's phone numbers. Even when I was in boarding school, off the top of my head, I knew like at least 15 people's phone numbers.
Yeah.
Right? Because it was like, all right, cool. Like I need that, recall it, blah, blah, blah. Cool. I want to call this person,
Yeah.
that person. Now we're so lazy. Like people don't even know how to drive anymore. People don't know how to navigate because you just put
I
in
don't
the
know the streets.
you
I know.
just
I
put
don't know
the
the
GPS.
streets.
You just put the
I know.
GPS and you just go. You just follow the thing. Even in your own neighborhood. Before it's like, all right, I need to know the city. I'm driving around
Yeah.
LA. Cool. I need to know LA, right?
Yeah.
I can't just be. And this has happened in absolutely everything. People don't know how to cook anymore. People aren't learning how to.
We just like don't really have any real skills anymore. I always feel so dumb when I'm at a doctor's office and I'm filling out the form and it's asking me for my emergency contact and I have to pull out my phone to look up my emergency contact and I'm thinking, wait a second, you dummy. It's emergency contact. So you should have it memorized in case of an emergency.
Yeah.
And like I don't even have my emergency contact memorized. I have to pull out my phone like, here's my mother's number.
But then you go, oh, it's backed up to the cloud, so maybe I don't need to remember it, you know? Right? So
but what if your phone's dead?
Yeah, but then you can still access the cloud without your phone, right? Like there's still
what if
a backup.
What if it's an emergency? Like
no, I'm not trying to excuse it. I'm just saying that this is how lazy we've gotten. Yeah, like it's just like, the technology can take care of it.
Because every problem has a solution to the point where you don't have to figure out the solution anymore. It's already been resolved. You just have to have access to the tools that you need, and then you don't have to figure anything else out yourself. But yeah, so like that was the gist of that post. I was saying like hard times breed strong men, right? Strong men breed easy times,
good times,
easy times, or good times, and then good times breed weak men, which is where we are now. We have easy times, we have good times, so then we have weak men and women, not to just say, you know, like we mean like mankind, not just like men.
It's okay.
And then weak men breed hard times, which is where we're headed. But then and like, okay, so this is also like, I think this is just like a perpetual infinite cycle of life. I don't think it's anyone's fault. I feel like it's just like it keeps happening, and like we're a product of our environment. You can't ask people to not live easy when life is made easy for them. Like you can't just expect people to, well then memorize all your contacts, you know, well then like learn all the streets. It's like, no, I'm not gonna do that.
Well, here's something I challenge that a little bit. And I think that the way you become a strong person and a highly skilled person, especially in this modern era, is you have to create your own hardship to some degree.
Yeah.
Right. You don't need to go full hog. I'm not saying you need to just like, you know, go live out in the woods and in a cabin by the woods for the next 5 years and do all your own hunting and fishing and farming, which is not, that's a pretty dope idea actually. If anyone wants to do it. Right?
I was like, that sounds kind of cool.
Yeah, I know people who do that and like, I respect it, but you have to create your own hardship. Like look, let's take something really, really basic. Going to the gym. What are you actually doing when you go to the gym? You are artificially, you're artificially
putting yourself through hardship.
Yeah. You're basically replicating what your ancestors would have been doing just by necessity to survive, right? Imagine people 200 years ago even watching someone going to the gym. They'd be like, what on earth is this person doing? Like, why are they like, calories are expensive, right? People weren't trying to burn calories unnecessarily. It's like, why you imagine seeing someone on a treadmill. They're like, what on earth is this person doing?
Right.
So
You
wait, you
crazy?
got in a car, and you drove to walk to walk on. You're not going anywhere, right? Like, you're just doing this, and then you're like lifting weights. It's like, what on earth are these people doing? It would be the most
Yeah.
confusing thing to them. They'd be like, what is this place? What are they
Yeah.
doing? Right? It would be
Another
mind-blowing.
another thing I do that always makes me extremely feel dumb. I'm also like very aware of the times that I'm dumb, right? Which is like, it doesn't help. Is like, I go to this like workout in LA, and then I take the elevator from the parking to go to my class to do legs.
Oh
And
yeah.
the leg workout is, a bunch of it is stairmaster, so you're just climbing stairs. So I'm just like, oh my god, this is so stupid.
Thinking about your life, but this is the thing, right? Just to stay in shape, we have
Yeah,
to artificially put pressures on our body through strength training and cardiovascular training and stretching, etc., just to maintain like a base level, like a decent level of healthiness. You have to actively avoid, like, if you just take the easy path, right? Especially if you live in one of these modern Western countries, and you just take the easy path when it comes to food, when it comes to exercise, when it comes to even relationships, when it comes to basic thinking, when it comes to all of these things, right? That's when you just end up, the I don't want to be I don't want to sound harsh towards the average person, right? But like, you just become a very mediocre at best individual, right? You end up with all these problems. You end up sick just by default, just by living
yeah,
by the default standards of modern society. You actually end up literally sick. You end up fat,
yeah,
you end up weak, you end up mentally like unhealthy, and you have to actively fight against all of these
yeah,
things just to like stay a healthy human. You have to fight against all of these things. You have to fight against certain temptations, right? Every, like, look, this is not something people talk about, but every person in the world, certainly every man has, all sorts of porn on,
yeah.
right? Even before, like, even growing up, like, dude, if people wanted to even like see some like pornography back in the day, it was like, oh, you had to like
It's like, watch your
go to a
neighbors through the
store,
window.
or you had to go to a store, do this. Now it's like, look, again,
Oh,
this freaking device, like, teenage boys, men, whatever,
yeah,
and no one talks about this because it's taboo, but it's just like, everything is just there. So you have to like actively fight this like temptation of just like, oh well, that's just there. So you've got guys who just, they've just checked out of the whole mating game because they can just like they'll just
yeah,
sit there and they're fully addicted, and it's just like, oh well, I can satisfy that desire just
yeah,
like that, and then I can satisfy my food desire, can satisfy
yeah.
my dopamine desire, whatever it is. And you just end up with just people who become slaves to really basal desires and to technology
Laziness.
itself. Yeah.
It's so easy to like become lazy. Like, it's so easy to be lazy these days.
Extraordinarily.
I had two sex therapists on my podcast a few episodes back, and I posted on my story for people to ask me questions that they would want me to ask a sex therapist, right?
Okay.
The amount of people that were asking questions only about porn addiction was
Mm.
shocking to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Oh yeah.
I remember I was looking at the questions and I was like, I had no idea this
Oh
was
my gosh.
such a big problem. Like, the amount of people that were like, yeah, I can't stop.
Yeah.
I can't stop. And like,
Mm-hmm.
just the diversity of problems that comes from that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the porn addiction on its own, but then it's like, okay, now I can't enjoy real sex. Now I can't stop comparing real
Mm-hmm.
women. Like, and I was like, wow, I never knew this was such a massive problem.
Oh my gosh. Unbelievably huge
So
problem. That's why Saudi
Yeah.
just banned. That's why they just ban it.
You
Ban it.
know, yeah, it's
Right?
like it's so funny. Like the main problem we have, like us Westerns have with like a country like Saudi, I know like mine personally is that like I'm so much about freedom, you know?
Yeah.
And like that's the main problem we have, the fact that people over there don't have freedom. But then it's like, maybe we have too much freedom here, you know? Maybe you don't need to be so free, you know? Maybe you need some like parenting. Maybe we all need some like guiding, some like limitations. Like maybe we have
Mm.
too much freaking freedom.
Well, the funny thing is, your freedom can turn you into a slave,
Yeah.
right?
Ooh.
Yeah, you can quote that one. I don't think I've ever said that before, but your freedom can turn you into a slave, right? Because you just become
Yeah.
a slave to all of these things that we've just discussed. You become an addict, right? Because you're not in control anymore. Those people sending you
Yeah.
those messages, they're not in control. Someone who's addicted to food, addicted to sugar, addicted to junk food, they're not they're not in control. So are you free if you're not even in control? Like you can't even control what you're doing. It's like, no, you've developed this reliance on this thing. So what started out as freedom has become your bondage. And I think
Yeah.
on the flip side of that, to me, and I think Jocko Willink has this clip. He has this quote. I think he says discipline equals freedom, right? Where so actually living a very disciplined
Yeah.
lifestyle actually makes you more free because you aren't a slave to all of your desires and all of your
Yeah.
temptations and every bit of technology or fancy thing here or shiny thing there. You're like, no, I'm disciplined, and so my freedom comes from the discipline. It doesn't mean that, I think freedom is a funny word, because I think when we talk about freedom and we talk about it in the good way, we're talking about freedom from state coercion and state action, right? We're saying, okay, the government doesn't come and, the police don't come and kick down your door because you're doing XYZ, right? But also I think when some people think of freedom, they think of like libertinism, right? They think of just like, not libertarianism, like, just
No, no, no. Yeah.
hedonism, libertinism, just doing whatever you want, every pleasure you want, every desire you have, just fulfilling everything, being a glutton, being a sex addict, being whatever it is, drugs, drinking, whatever, debauchery. When I talk about freedom, I'm talking about the absence of the state and governmental intervention. I'm not just saying like, yeah, you should just go out there and do everything just because it's legal. Right? Something being legal or not being illegal doesn't mean that it's a good thing to do, or that it's healthy for you, or that you should, do it with no
Mm-hmm.
moderation, etc. So
Yeah.
I think perhaps it's a bit of a semantically overloaded word, because when people say a simple word like freedom, I think you get lots of different interpretations of what people mean by it. Yeah, just an interesting thought there. It was a little bit of a ramble, but
What does freedom mean to you?
means what I said there. So freedom or liberty to me means absence of state force and coercion in order to compel um, behavior beyond a reasonable limit, right? Like,
Right.
obviously if you're infringing on someone else's rights, obviously, you can't, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not,
Yeah.
harm or assault anybody. But outside of that, outside of violence or infringing on someone else's rights, private property rights, etc., then, things generally being legal, shall we say.
Yeah. See,
But
like
then
most
that's where
people.
that's when you need other codes and structures, and I'd argue perhaps even belief systems, in order to stop that devolving
Yeah.
into what we know it can devolve into.
Right. No, I agree with that. And it's an interesting topic because like most people, if you ask them what freedom means to you, they would say the ability to do whatever I want, whenever I want, with whoever I want. Right?
Mm,
Freedom.
mm,
All right. So
yeah.
then maybe like that definition on its own is just like the lack of structure in that
Mm,
definition of freedom, right? Because it's like whatever I want, whenever I want, whoever I want, you know? It's like
Mm.
there's no structure.
To me, that sounds like libertinism, or even, debauchery. I think that's not a,
Yeah,
and like I said, there are different definitions. I think the definition I gave is a little bit of a political
it is. Yeah,
definition of
yeah,
freedom, on a more individualistic level.
yeah, yeah,
Then it might be defined differently. That might be, even come down with something to do with having enough resources to even be able to live a certain way without feeling compulsion in certain areas and so on. Um, but it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one. I just think that every every society, every country, and then more importantly, every individual needs to work out where that is. Okay, here's a great way to put it. I think freedom is the framework that allows that to even happen, that allows
yeah,
each individual to even come up with their own framework and code and structure. So I have my own way of doing things. I have my own discipline and belief systems and religion and code of conduct and family values, etc. But I do not enforce that through any force or coercion on
other people.
on other people, right? So yeah, we all stick within the law. Look, I'm not going to rob you, I'm not going to assault you, I'm not going to kill you, but beyond that, you have the freedom within this system to live the way you want. I think that's the way USA does freedom very well, right? It's like, look,
Yeah,
we're not mandating this. You have freedom of speech, you have freedom of and from religion, you have freedom of association, you have freedom of expression, so on and so forth. I do think, though, that within that structure, there are absolutely, there's a hierarchy of morality and goodness, shall we say, right? So not everything is created equal. Not all lifestyles are equal. Not all behaviors are equal. Not all, that's just the reality. And I think, again, when people go too far into their kind of like weird postmodernist super subjective
yeah,
thinking, they end up with this thing of like, oh well, everything's the same, so it doesn't really matter whether you do this or you do that. Like, we shouldn't judge anything, you know we shouldn't criticize anything or ridicule. Like, everything's, if it's legal, good to go, kind of thing. And
yeah,
that's not good either.
yeah. No, I get that. And with the same point that you made, I don't know the person you named who said through discipline you will gain
mm.
freedom. Who is that you said?
Jocko Willink, he's a former Navy SEAL, I believe.
Is
He's
that the
got a
guy
big
that
podcast.
is that the guy that wakes up at 4 in the morning and takes a
Yes.
picture of the sun? Oh, okay.
But yeah.
Right, right.
Jocko, yeah.
So Jordan Peterson has a similar he talks about that, but which he says like through suffering. Like he talks about
Mm,
like responsibility and suffering a lot. And I remember I went on a keto diet one time for like a month and then I couldn't handle it after that anymore. But I remember it was the easiest time for me to figure out what I want to eat. Even though like I
mm,
wasn't super happy with it, but whenever like we would go to a restaurant, I'm very indecisive when it comes to like choosing what I eat because I'm such a foodie. I want to make sure I like make the right choice. But like having like a full on menu in front of me and like the freedom of having like whatever I want would always like give me like it makes me dizzy. Like it takes me a while
mm,
to order. But whenever I was on a keto diet, I couldn't have certain food. So then my choice would be very selected for me already.
mm.
It was already like kind of decided for me. So it was just so easy.
Yep.
I remember I felt relieved. I was like, oh, I don't have to make this choice because I don't have the freedom
Mm,
to do it.
mm,
It's already chosen for me. I knew what I'm going to order. And then when I would get my food, I wouldn't keep thinking, oh, but if I had gotten that other thing, because I always do that. I always like, I get something and I'm like, oh, I should have gotten the other thing. Oh, I should have. And then it like, I don't know if other people get like that with food, and I know it's a super simple example, but it really like just kind of like goes to the same point of like sometimes when you have the choices taken away from you, it might rip you a little bit of your freedom, but it's easier. It's easier on your brain. it doesn't take as much time, and you
Hmm.
tend to just be happier with it because they're just like more simple and it's decided for you. So I remember that was just like such an easier time for me, and I felt so relieved.
That makes total sense. Makes total sense.
Yeah. Well, with that being said, we just talked for an hour and a half. You know, I remember I was nervous talking to you because like I'm such a fan of your work, and you're such a free thinker, and I think like you're obviously very intelligent. I was a little nervous talking to you because I was like, ooh, what if like, I say the wrong thing? But this was so much fun. Our conversation had a great flow, I feel like, and we just talked for an hour and a half. So thank you
That
so
was
much.
awesome. No doubt. You're so welcome, Bonnie.
I had a draft of all the questions I wanted to ask you, didn't get to any of them.
Perfect. Perfect. Those are the best ones.
Yeah, we just kind of spun off. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Where can people find you?
Sure thing. So you can find me on all social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Zuby Music. That is Zuby Music. And if you want to check out my music or podcast, you can find those on iTunes and Spotify. And if you go to zubymusic.com, you will find links to everything there.
What are a couple of your own favorite tracks that you've had out? I definitely want to download
Man,
them.
okay, I've had a lot out, but over the years, you could try "Coming at Ya" on my new album. You can try "Devil May Cry," "Okay Dude." I've got a track called "Remember the Name," which is one of my favorites. "Perseverance." A lot of people like that one. So those are a few to get people started.
For sure. Thank you so much. Let's do another episode another time so that we can get to the rest of my questions. Please, please, and thank you.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Zuby. Bye.